I think a lot of people worry, right, about masturbation or viewing pornography to masturbation and how that affects your experience of pleasure with another partner. Particularly because a lot of young people are learning how
Yeah,
to pleasure through themselves. So, have
right.
you found any evidence of that?
Obviously not in rats, but in humans for sure. There is evidence that people are weird, right? I mean, rats, I don't think would ever do this. They don't get stuck in a habit. They just naturally do something different. Whereas we tend to get stuck in habits. And it seems to be part of the great, weird part of human existence that we like things that are predictable, but things that are predictable bore us. So eventually predictability is boring, and doing it, every Friday night at 11:30 when the evening news signs off becomes boring, right? And people know this because they have fantasies. They have fantasies about what they like to do, what they wish they could do if only they were with the right person or in the right, uh, I don't know, circumstance for it to be done. You saw this with Masters and Johnson, yeah, when they did their original sensate focused therapy in groups. So, they have 2 weeks. These people can't touch each other for a week and a half of that 2 weeks, and they're listening to other people's fantasies. And everybody's getting completely crazy about that. They're, it's like, oh my God, I really want to do this. But no, you can't. Now you've got to then discover the erogenous parts of your partner and discover them in yourself. And by the second Friday, it was, release the hounds. Okay. And people would always say, oh my God, I felt like I was 16 again. It was so good. It was so amazing. Now they're doing the same thing with their partners, but they've gotten turned on by their partner's fantasies and turned on maybe by expressing their own. Yeah. And what I think is really interesting is that that's exactly what well, I mean, it's probably always been this way, but this is what porn gives you. It's a venue for arousal, and it's a fantasy venue for arousal, right? Either by being explicit or by doing something that has some kind of fantasy storyline to it, right? So, you go on Pornhub and it's like, it's all fantasies. The fantasies of the older woman, the older man, the whatever, the brother, sister, et cetera, et cetera. It's all this fantasy laden stuff, right? And people find the fantasies that they can express more arousing, but they find the ones that they don't express even more arousing because they're more naughty, right? So yes, I like looking at, I live in the, I don't know, in Mississippi, and I like looking at interracial porn. Now, why do I like looking at interracial porn? Because it's way more naughty to do that in a place that has, surviving race laws, even if they're not enshrined in the legal system. You're just not supposed to. Don't bring a person that isn't your color home. Well, if you do, now what happens? Right now, exotic has become erotic, and it's this massive activation of excitement. If you can't express that with your partner, only because you think you can't, then you go off and kind of surreptitiously do it while you're masturbating. And that becomes more interesting because you're now expressing the fantasy than it is having that sex every Friday night at 11:30 with the lights out after the news, and then you roll over and fall asleep, right? It's almost like a duty, a marital duty, as opposed to this fantasy that you both could share. I find it really interesting that people don't share porn with each other. Like couples, it's just like, what do you like? What turns you on? Oh, there's a good question, right? And your partner says, well, I like looking at this. You're like, wow. But the partner's not going to tell you because they might feel they're being judged. You're not going to say it because you might feel that you're going to be judged. And we've got this big negative cloud over that. I think the cloud needs to clear. The sun needs to come out, and people need to start talking to each other about it because it reflects their fantasies. I think that's all it is. Unfortunately, you got people that are, my son's age, for example, who look at porn and they'll say, oh, so choking is okay. It's like, okay, no, you have no idea what you're doing. You want to get into kink, great, but you have no idea what you're doing. You need a trainer. You need somebody who shows you that, right? And, he didn't know that he could go to the BDSM community, for example, and find somebody who could say, well, this is exactly how you do it without actually killing the person or hurting the person, right? And so you could play this game, right? If that's what you're into. I think that's really interesting that it's there, but people don't take advantage of it because they sort of steal it away. It's like, oh, well,
Or
this is
part of it is they
okay.
feel it's naughty, right?
Exactly.
They have this moral incongruence. Like, how could I would never do this in real life. I would only watch it
Right.
in, in silence.
I mean, I think it's really interesting. And, you talk to people in the kink community, BDSM community, they feel that they're in the lifestyle. Okay. They've made the transition from just thinking about it to learning now how to do it, and how to do it in a way that enhances their sex lives. I mean, I think that's really interesting. People can do that with vanilla. They can do that with, any flavor of ice cream. You could talk about it while you're having sex. You could play role play. There's like a million things that can be done, and that, I think more and more therapists are realizing that, okay, you've got a desire disorder. We're going to treat that desire disorder, but now what? Okay, we've taught you how to swim so you don't drown, but how do we teach you maybe how to be an Olympic swimmer? Without imposing our own morality on you. But how can you now learn how to swim to bodybuild, or swim to, to achieve an end of greater closeness with your partner?
It's challenging. I mean, I think that there's so much moral incongruence with pornography. Rather than looking at it as a tool that could be used potentially in a positive way, a lot of people end up having so much shame and guilt around it that, one, they feel like they're a bad person, or two, they just don't find that enjoyment in their own personal experiences, and then they develop all these issues like, oh, my sex life isn't great, or they don't connect with their partner like they should.
That's exactly true. And I think getting people to open up is really important. We saw this like in some of the pharmaceutical trials for drugs like bremelanotide or flibanserin, about a 30% placebo rate of people getting better just on the placebo. And part of that was really people having the opportunity just to talk about their sex lives, to kind of get it out in the open. All this pent up, oh, I don't like it. I don't like it when he touches me this way, and he always touches me that way. And so just getting it out sometimes it lifts a huge weight off of people, and they can actually then express themselves sexually. I find that really interesting, that we are pent up about it. It's like, oh, I can't do this and I can't do that. And then it's like, I do it and it's like, is it okay? Did I break anything? Are we still in a relationship? Do you still love me? And it's like, oh, yes, I do, even more. Now I want you even more. Right. And so it really has a positive effect, I think, if people use it as a tool and not necessarily as an end in itself.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking about having sex is that there develops a synchrony. Tell me, like, what exactly is going on physiologically? Like, are there actual changes that you're seeing, the way our brains light up or things like that? Are there things that are actually physiologically happening during this time that really help people sort of connect in a different level?
I think there are. Unfortunately, it hasn't been studied so much in a sexual circumstance, it's been studied a bit in a romantic circumstance, and a whole lot in mother-child interactions. You can see synchrony of brain waves, for example, if people are wearing an EEG apparatus. You can see synchrony of certain temporal lobe waves. If you surprise both of them, then they both show this delayed parietal wave of 300 milliseconds called the P300 wave. And they both start to show that to all new things. So they're both looking at a video screen, for example, and something happens. Now, when they're not romantically inclined, one might have a delayed P300, the other has a perfectly normal P300. But the ones that are really romantically inclined, they tend to have these synchronous moments together, right? And of course, where it's been studied a lot is in mother-child interactions. So, maintaining eye contact, for example, and showing that. Now, that requires you to be aware of the other person's face. But what are you looking at, really? Are you looking at the chin? Are you looking at the mouth move? Are you looking at the ears? Are you looking at the eyes? We tend to look much more at the eyes, right, when we're talking. Maybe at the eyes and the mouth. I mean, those are two things that people really spend a lot of time looking at. And not the nose, not the earlobe, it's not the forehead, because that just gets weird. But you're looking directly at the person. And when people do that, you again see synchronous wave patterns that happen when they're talking about things that are mutually like they both like, for example. So, tell me about something that you both did that you both found enjoyable. Well, we did this hike and we did this and we did that. And things are spiking in both of them at the same time. And that's synchrony at one level. Probably what's happening, the systems that underlie that, thalamic, the output from the thalamus, right, that kind of takes all your sensory input and merges it up to places that it needs to go. That thalamic output is really important for the generation of these kind of external cortical brainwaves. So you're feeling it again. When you're recounting it, you're feeling it. We've all done this. It's a nice feeling. You're telling a story about something that happened to you, and you're really into it because you're feeling it. Yeah. And you feel it again. And the person that you did this with feels it too as you're telling the story. I think we need to do a lot more work on that, a lot more work on finding out what synchrony is and how it gets lost, right, in couples that are beginning to drift apart, because that does happen. You can almost see this in the way they walk together. So couples in sync tend to walk either like this together or like this together. Yeah. And when they start like completely mismanaging that, yeah, it's really hard to keep your arm around a person or your hand in hand around a person because the lockstep is off, right? So they stop touching each other and they start really physically drifting apart. I think it would be very interesting and telling if you brought those people in, right? They'd have to self-identify, which would probably be a really hard thing to do and would be a problem with the data.
Hey, honey, we got to go sign up for this. I don't feel like we're in sync anymore.
Yeah, exactly, right. And then see if they show the same synchrony to these like events, right? And if they don't, that tells you then that what their bodies are doing is a reflection of what their brains are doing, which is always the case. But this would show that in a way. And then if you could get them to be in sync again, it's sort of like the old idea. Well, I feel depressed, so if I feel depressed, I'm gonna hold my face to show the emotion that I'm experiencing. But what happens when I force myself to smile and I'm not feeling good, right? And in some cultures, people do that anyway. But does that contribute to less depression? Because your body is doing something and your brain is saying, oh, well, I'm smiling, therefore I'm probably not as depressed as I think I am. I mean, your brain is really good at detecting heart rate. Your brain is so sensitive to heart rate. And when heart rate goes up, your brain is like, okay, what's going on here? Why is this happening? Yeah. So it's going to look for a cause and try to find it. And if it doesn't find it, then you feel a little bit weirder with yourself. But it's very interesting. Like with PTSD, you find that patients that have this need to go through cognitive behavior therapy to get their heart rate down and not go up when they're, shown something that produces the PTSD experience or reminds them of some horrible trauma that they were in. And I remember a study that was done in Montreal at the Douglas Research Hospital at McGill, where they gave PTSD patients propranolol, a beta blocker, okay, beta adrenergic blocker. So the heart rate isn't going to go up at all because it can't. And then they kind of flood them, right? These were all ex-soldiers. They flood them with a war movie or whatever, and their heart rate didn't go up. And they come back and they say, I feel totally different. And they show them the flooded movie again after giving them a saline injection, and they don't have a PTSD reaction. As if you've given them 3 months of cognitive behavior therapy. Yeah, only you've given them a single injection of propranolol. So the brain is saying, "Oh, I'm fixed. I'm good. I can experience this now without the reaction that makes me feel completely stressed out." Right? So if that happens, imagine that a similar kind of thing happens when you have first experiences with pleasure, first experiences with trauma, first experiences with your brain just tags it. As you grow apart, your brain tags it. So as you come back together, your brain may tag that too and say, we're experiencing this synchrony again. Oh, we're in love again. I don't feel like cheating on her anymore. I want to do this. I want to do it with her. I want to be with her because we're feeling that synchrony again.
You brought up an interesting thing about metoprolol. So arousal, right? When you're aroused, your heart rate goes up. And that can be arousal sexually, arousal on a bridge, arousal when you're whatever, scared. And we know that metoprolol has effects on erectile function for some, but I wonder if when you're on metoprolol, you're having maybe decreased arousal not just for erectile function, but just in general, like less arousal in the brain. Yeah.
That's exactly right. I would never suggest using this. Maybe for someone who has, who feels that they're, I don't know, having a problem with compulsive sexual behavior disorder or something of that nature. But I don't know that I would ever suggest. If somebody who's on this needs to know, right, before they go on it, like to treat a cardiovascular problem, they really need to know, okay, well, this could very well have an effect on everything that arouses you. So while you're on it, just know that this could happen. If it does, they're not going to go, oh my God, I have erectile dysfunction, because they do, but it's drug induced. It's not, it's not them. It's not inherent in them, right? That's happening.
Probably the same with women too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The control of clitoral erection is exactly the same in women and men. Yeah. I mean, it's the same organ, right? It's the same organ. So, ours is just a big distended clitoris.
So we talked a little bit about motivation and desire. Let's then talk about what happens in the brain once you are, you've started having intercourse, going into orgasm, and then after the orgasm.
Well, I would imagine that if it's anything like what our rats tell us, your dopamine levels go up, they start phasic, they go tonic, right? So you're just secreting dopamine all the time, okay? And that's as you're moving toward orgasm. Noradrenaline is up. It has to be, because you're aroused, and this is the arousal system. Now, serotonin is exerting a bit of at the spinal level, is exerting a bit of an effect that activates the parasympathetic system, so it keeps blood in the genitals rather than activating the sympathetic system. So your spinal cord has these what are called lateral spinothalamic neurons that are actually the orgasm generators, right? The sexual orgasm generators. And, they're essentially kind of a gate that's gating the parasympathetic. And as soon as the sympathetic outflow overruns that, they turn on. That allows for what's called fast ramping sympathetic flow. That fast ramping is when you reach the point of no return, where the orgasm is imminent. Even if a bear comes through the tent, you're still going to have an orgasm, right? So it's just an imminent reflexive action that's happening at that point, or what I would call a climax, right? With the orgasm being something that your brain experiences sort of in episodic memory, in a real experience that you can have, that consciously that you're having. When that happens, of course, both opioids and serotonin get released in the brain, especially in the frontal lobe, but also in the limbic system, like en masse. Okay, there's a massive release of beta endorphin in the brain. There's a massive release of other opioids as well, and serotonin in the frontal lobe. And what that does is, the first thing it does is it shuts dopamine down. And multiply orgasmic women, it can shut it down for a very small period, but it still shuts it down, right? If there was any more stimulation, you're like, okay, stop. That's just give me 10 seconds to recover and we can go again. In men, you're going to have a refractory period that lasts a bit longer, or maybe a whole lot longer. But that's one thing we don't understand at all, is the refractory period in humans. Like, some people understand it in rats better, some work of colleagues in Mexico, for example, but it's like we just don't understand a thing about human refractoriness. But if the rat data are telling us something about humans, the opioids are suppressing dopamine, serotonin is whoppingly suppressing dopamine. And while that suppression is on, your interest is minimized. It's not completely gone, but it's definitely minimized until it recovers. And once it recovers, you're back. That recovery is a real interesting phenomenon, because, again, we just don't know why. In some instances, it recovers faster. In other instances, it recovers slower. The pattern of orgasm seems to be the same in every person within each individual. You look at that in terms of the pelvic floor and the activation of the pelvic floor. So, some women have higher pelvic floor tension. Some have like almost no pelvic floor tension. And when they have an orgasm, it's almost like they have a volcanic eruption of the pelvic floor. The ones that have high tension tend to have an eruption that looks a bit like an avalanche, right? So it boom, 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 and then pelvic floor tension goes down. Others have waves of it, with the waves coming every 10 seconds, or even every minute. Just depends on how that works. And they last anywhere between 8 and 20 seconds, right, in terms of the pelvic floor. But what's also happening is because the dopamine has gone down, you get this massive release of prolactin. Now, it's not going to make you lactate because it's not lasting very long, because the dopamine is going to come back when that serotonergic inhibition goes off. But that release of prolactin is another objective measure of orgasm, right? I mean, again, unless you're lactating or you have a pituitary adenoma that's secreting prolactin, or you've got, I don't know, like some horrible stress that is chronic and long lasting and unavoidable, and now you begin to get a little prolactin release. You don't see that unless you're having an orgasm. Without doing an invasive thing, we can use some of these markers of orgasm to say, okay, did it really happen? Did you have a climax or did you have an orgasm? The orgasm is kind of added on top of the climax, that reflexive action, the movement from parasympathetic to sympathetic. I mean, it's an interesting thing that's happening in the brain. And of course, when dopamine goes down, your interest goes down, your motivation is less, right? Now, it doesn't mean you don't have motivation to go again. And that can depend on, a whole host of factors, one of which is the degree of sympathetic arousal that you're experiencing. So in new relationships, people might say, oh, well, God, I had sex, I could ejaculate 3 times with this new relationship and blah, blah, blah. And then once we moved in together, well, now we're having sex once a week. What happened there? Well, I mean, again, habit can bring that sympathetic arousal down. Then you go and have vacation sex and suddenly you're, now doing it twice instead of 3 times. It just depends on that flip of that switch, both at the spinal level, but also in your brain, that's saying, oh my God, I'm really excited, right? As opposed to, same old, yeah, it's Friday, time for our duty. I think that people toggle between that. And then they do something where, again, we discussed porn, maybe they go and cheat on their partner with somebody else. And when they do that, well, now what? Now their sympathetic arousal is back. And they're like, oh, I felt young again with the new one. But they don't understand that, okay, get rid of the old one, go with the new one, same thing is going to happen. You're going to basically just go through this serial, quote unquote, serial monogamy, right? You're monogamous until it's no longer arousing. Then you go pick somebody else, without knowing that you could have all this arousal with your same partner. Because what the brain is doing is the same thing every time. It's just the level of arousal is going to change the context.
It was Ian Kerner. We were just talking about how people refuse to work at sex. Like they just don't want to. They literally refuse to have any sort of oh no, sex should be natural. It should be easy. Their arousal should always be there. But we're not cavemen and women anymore. There's stressors in life. There's a whole bunch of other things going on. We have these devices that maintain our interest. We have crazy pornography that's always accessible. And so yeah, you have to work at being with your partner and working on it if you want that arousal to stay high.
That's absolutely right. People get a sense that working on it means that they're carrying like a big sack of bricks behind them. Oh, I have to work at this to get the, but as opposed to play. Remember being a kid, and when you played, what did you do? You did a little bit of this, then a little bit of that, then a little bit of something else. Then you spent a long time drawing with crayons and you made a picture. Oh, now you're done with the picture. Now it's on to something else. And you can do this with a partner sexually. You can do anything. It's like I hear, clinicians sometimes say, oh, I had this one guy, and I was trying to get them just to not do the same thing every time. So I suggested that they have sex in the kitchen. And they looked at me like, this is rocket science. Like, how do you do that? Sex in the kitchen? How would you? And she was like, well, get a chair. I don't know. Burn the pot roast. Go for crepes. I don't know. There's a way to do that. There's a way to have sex on a couch. There's a way to have sex in the basement. There's a way to do it in different rooms, not relegated only to a bed. Well, but the bed is comfortable. The couch is comfortable. A table can be comfortable. I think it can be anything. Sherhite has a great quote that, sex can be a hot dog and a Coke or a 5-course French meal, right? But the idea is not to do only one thing. Don't only live on a hot dog and a Coke, and don't only live on 5-course French meals, but steal a quickie. You're home for lunch, steal a quickie and go back to work, right? I mean, there's a million things to do that people can do. I think what happens is when they move in with each other, now it's like, oh, well, now sex is going to be easy because we can do it whenever we want because we live together. I don't have to go over to your place. You don't have to come over to my place. And then we have to arrange what's going to happen the next morning. When do you leave? Now we live together. So now it's easy. I think easy, of course, makes it less arousing just because it's easy, right? And it's always available. What people forget to do is date each other, right? They forget what it was like to plan for it, to anticipate it, to want it, to not have it whenever you want it, but have it on a date night. And don't go back home. Send the kids off to your grandparents. It's like rent a hotel room, have sex in the hotel room. Now you're doing something interesting, maybe naughty, maybe however you experience it, but it's something different, and choose a different hotel every time. Like, don't go to the same hotel. Oh, let's go to room 457 because that's the room we always have. No, go to a different hotel.
There's these websites now where you can like rent for a few hours, and it's not like the Motel 6s, like you can actually rent a nice hotel for like 4 hours. And absolutely, dating doesn't mean dinner and a movie. It can mean whatever you want it to mean. And I think that's so important.
Absolutely. Like, just don't do the same thing over and over and over again. But again, that's the great human paradox. We want to be able to predict things. Habit allows you to predict things, but habit is boring. And so we move always, with like a sine wave through wanting things to be predictable to wanting things to be unpredictable, because it's way more arousing when they're unpredictable than when they're predictable.
If you guys enjoyed that clip, make sure to check out the full video with Dr. Jim Faust right here.